Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're going to do a top 10. Topic of this top 10 WWE European Champions. And when I say WWE, that also covers when it was a WWF. This was a title that I think lasted about 5-6 years. There were numerous champions. Most of them were short runs just because of the time frame it was in. There was nothing but short runs. So we're going to break it down. We have the 10 best in my opinion. I'm going to tell you how long they held the belt either on their one reign or cumulatively through all of their reigns if they have multiples. And I'm also going to give you my opinions on it. So with that, number 10, Kurt Angle, who's a one-time European champion, held the belt for a total of 51 days. To me, this was one of those building blocks that helped really build Kurt Angle into a main event star. He had both the European and Intercontinental Championship at the time, so that really helped him build credibility, not that he needed it, being an Olympic gold medalist with a broken freaking neck. This was one of those times that just helped propel him more into that upper echelon, which he was going to get to no matter what. He did great with the belt, and the belt helped him. That's why he's on the list. Next up, number 9, Owen Hart. Owen had the belt one time for a total of 52 days, and it's another thing that when I think of Owen, especially after Brett left for WCW, this is one of the highlights of that time frame for me. This and his team with Jeff Jarrett. And Owen was one of my favorite wrestlers of that era, and I absolutely loved him. I love what he did here. I mean, anything Owen did was just gold. That's why he's on this list. Next up, our number 8, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Michaels had one run, totaling 92 days. Again, another historic run. Another one of those times where it really helped build the belt, especially when you're giving it to a main event type wrestler, in probably his most memorable gimmick, with that being during his Degeneration X time. What can you say? Michaels holding the belt made the belt look better. Next up, our number 7, Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy had the belt one time for a total of 122 days. And again, this was another thing, kind of like with Owen in the same way or a similar way. This helped take Matt out of the shadow of his brother Jeff and out of the Hardy's tag team and helped really solidify him as a solo wrestler. This is a case of the belt elevated Matt, but Matt was ready for that elevation, did a great job with it, especially for that time frame. He is one of my favorite European champions of that time frame and one of the highlights of WWE during that time. That's why he's on the list. Next up at number 6, Triple H. Triple H had 2 runs totaling 149 days. I mean, it's a game. It may not be thought of as his biggest time in wrestling, but again, this was another thing, much like Angle, that helped build him to where he could get to a main event status. He did awesome with it, especially the way he won, at least one of them, with the somewhat finger poke of doom finish against Shawn Michaels, which doesn't get brought up as much because I think it worked better with them and fans were a bit more forgiving. So yeah, I thought he did great both times he held it. That's why he's on here. Next up, our number 5, Latino Heat, Eddie Guerrero. Look, anything Eddie Guerrero touched turned to gold, so him being a European champion, he held the belt twice for a total of 134 days. I mean, come on, it's Eddie. Anything that Eddie does is going to make top 10 lists because he's that iconic, he was that good of a wrestler. That's why he's on here. Next up, our number 4, the third member of Degeneration X to make the list, XPac. XPac had 2 reigns totaling 132 days. And while his reigns may not have been as long as Triple H or Eddie Guerrero, the difference with X-Pac is I think when you think back to the time frame, like Eddie, when you think of Eddie, you think of his Universal Championship run. When you think of Triple H, you think of his world title runs. You may think of the Intercontinental ladder match early in his career. But you don't really consider, until you really dig into it, their European runs, where X-Pac, when you think about his contributions at the time, you think about him as a European champion. So for X-Pac, his 2 runs totaling 132 days, get him to the number 4 spot. I'm going from that, our number 3, our second Hart Foundation member and the inaugural European champion. He held the belt a total of 2 times for 249 days, the British Bulldog. And I might be wrong. I think while I was compiling the information, I was Wasn't looking at individual reigns, but I do think the Bulldog did have the longest individual reign of that, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's a British Bulldog, he's obviously European, it fits with him, it was like a belt that was made for him, basically. That's why he's on the list. I thought it was awesome. He's an absolute legend, definitely belongs on here. Now going from that, our number 2, back-to-back wrestlers from the UK, William Regal. Regal had 4 reigns, totaling 173 days. And again, much like I said with XPac, this is a championship that is synonymous with Regal, especially Regal's time in WWE. We all wanted him to do much more. We all wanted him to be a world champion. But whenever he did have a championship, he elevated it so much because he had that world championship potential. Regal, an amazing wrestler, hence why he's so high on the list. I think he was awesome with the belt. Now, before we do get to our number 1, we do a thing here called the best of the rest. Basically, it is things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, Christian. Christian had the belt 1 time for a total of 98 days. Much like I said with Matt Hardy, this was Christian's way of kind of stepping out of the shadow of Edge and proving that he could be a viable commodity, that he could be a main event guy. You can see it still to this day. Christian is wrestling at a very high level. He was always great. I thought his run with the European Championship was awesome, hence why he was considered. Didn't quite make the list though. Last but not least on the best of the rest, Test. Test had the championship once for 68 days, and if I'm being honest, this is probably Test's high watermark of his entire career. I think this was the highlight. Test, to me, is a little bit underrated. I think he doesn't quite get the respect he deserves. I absolutely loved watching him work, especially during that time frame. This is why he was thought of, but didn't quite make the list. Now, before we do get to our number 1, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you think I put someone too high, put someone too low, left a champion off the list altogether, let me know in the comments. With that being said, our number 1 European champion of all time, you may have guessed it just by omission, you're looking at the real deal, D'Lo Brown. And I know that was probably the worst D'Lo Brown head shake you've ever seen, but if there's one guy that when I say European champion that pops into everybody's head, it is D'Lo. And D'Lo did so much with the belt, and he made the belt so important. His 4 reigns totaled 126 days, but he felt like he was always a champion. Even though there's guys that held the belt longer or even had the belt longer with just 1 reign, I don't think anyone short of him had the impact that he did on that specific championship. Again, like I said, when you think of someone that comes synonymous with a championship, like when I say big gold belt, you think Ric Flair automatically. When I say winged eagle, you think Hulk Hogan. When I say smoking skull, you think Steve Austin. When I say Intercontinental Championship, you may think Gunther, you may think Honky Tonk Man. When I say European Championship, D'Lo Brown's right at the top of that list of people you think of because of how great he was with it. And again, D'Lo's another guy, highly underrated, probably deserves a lot more respect than what he gets. I think he was awesome. That's why he's here. Now, with all that being said, that is my top 10 European champions. Again, if you disagree, let me know in the comments. My name is George Coles, and this has been another Top 10.